Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of Nora Speaks, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Thank you for joining me for episode 267. And as we are marching our way on through Women's History Month, I wanted to take another episode to talk about someone who I think is significant and who contributed something meaningful to the experience of Black people in America. And today I'm talking about Zora Neale Hurston. Many may know her from the great book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. But she's not just an author, she was a journalist, an anthropologist. She traveled to study how Black people lived, worshiped, ate, how they practiced their culture, not just in this country, but also abroad. And the first book that I read by her was Barracoon. And Barracoon is the story of the last Black cargo, referring to the last ship, the Clotilda, that set shore from West Africa, coming to North America. Although slavery and the transatlantic slave trade was unlawful in the U.S., this ship still came to the shores of North America and deposited slaves. And one of those individuals that Zora Neale Hurston interviewed and met was an individual, a man named Aluale Kasalu. And he's also known as Cudjo Lewis, his slave name. However, she met him in 1927. And I think it's really interesting in listening to Cudjo, listening to his recounting his experience, not just during his experience as a slave in America, but how he got to be here. And that book details that history. It details the history of his experience on the ship, his experience coming to the shores of North America, as well as his experience as a slave and then post-slavery in how they were able to find a place for themselves. So I don't want to go too far ahead. I do want to talk about that book. I want to talk about him a bit and Zora Neale Hurston. And I can't recall how that book came to my attention, but I bought it and I probably read it in a couple of days. It was a firsthand account of a man's experience through chattel slavery from captivity. You know, a lot of our people that we may have read books about, they were descendants of parents who themselves were slaves. And here we have with Cudjo Lewis, a man who himself was captured in Africa, in the barracks or the huts, as they were called, hence the name Barracoon of this book. And they were held there until they set sail for North America. And if we recall the movie Woman King and that tribe of warrior soldiers that Viola Davis represented in that movie, that was, I can't recall the name of that tribe right now, but that was a tribe that would capture other Africans and sell them to slave traders. And in fact, Kudju's family and his village were raided, and many were slain, and some were taken captive and held and sold to white slave traders. And he was one of those individuals. And so it's really interesting. It was interesting to me to hear that that history. I remember when the movie Woman King was coming out and reading that in reading from Africans about how odd it was for some to see that tribe be celebrated, the tribe of women that Viola Davis represented and portrayed. And I didn't understand it because I didn't know who they were. I didn't know the history. And I guess at some point, that book came up, that book, Barakun. And so I said, well, let me go and read more about this. And I really, from reading that book, came to understand just how brutal that tribe was, that Viola Davis character represented, how brutal they were, how systemic it was for Africans to be captured by other Africans and sold to the white slave traders. And so he was a teenager. Unfortunately, when he was captured, Kuju, and he was living in a village, um, what is now known as Benin in Africa, and he was taken with others to the stockades, to the barracks, to the huts, where they was sold, held until they were sold, and interestingly enough, when that slave ship Clotilda came to the US, it wasn't a secret. As I said, slavery, or at least America's participation, was outlawed. It was no longer legal. Now, slavery wasn't illegal, but it was illegal for slaves to be transported to the United States. And so, although this happened and it was known, there was no prosecution, there was no one held responsible or punished. And so, these men and women were sold in the US and, experienced the horrors of American slavery. And one of the things, another thing that I thought was pretty interesting is how the American blacks or coloreds, as they were called, the black slaves who had been here for generations, looked down on Kuju and others who came with him straight off the slave ship. Now, remember, 1860 was when Kuju came to the shores of North America. And, slavery had been practiced, for centuries at that point in the US. And so here comes another crop of blacks to work, and they couldn't speak English. Right now, here we are, slaves in America speaking a broken English, yet looking down our nose at the most recent slaves brought off the ships. And so once slavery was abolished in 1865, Kuju and others, now this was in Alabama, they were able to purchase a plot of land because at the time they had nowhere to go. And the Black American slaves who had been here for some time, who had been here for generations, as I said, they looked down on them. So they didn't have a place with them. So they created their own place in Alabama called Africatown, which is pretty interesting and fascinating. And so when uh, um, Zora Neale Hurston met Kuju, it was in 1927. And at that time, she was working as a journalist. She was studying people, studying behavior, studying cultures. And he was known at the time to be one of the last um, blacks ever brought across the shores and to be made a slave in the United States. And, you know, it's interesting to read the book and to listen to him recount his history. And although she began meeting with him in 1927, she would continue to come back and visit and get more notes. And she completed her writing in 1931. However, she was not able to have her book published because she wrote the book in the dialect in which the subject spoke. So she would not clean it up so that it would be more palatable or more or easier to be read or understood because obviously Cujo and others that she interviewed spoke a very, very, very broken English. And so to honor the subject and the people that she was interacting with and learning from, she kept that in the book. And because of that, um, she was not able to have that book published, not in her time. Unfortunately, the book wasn't published until 2018. Now, you heard me say earlier that this book was completed in 1931, but unfortunately, she did not get to see this book published, although she wrote many other books and essays and short stories. But this book and others, she was constantly encouraged to clean it up. So it didn't sound so, I guess, primitive as some publishing companies would describe it. But in honor of the subjects, she maintained what she wrote, and she maintained the character of the people that she wrote about, which I really think is an honorable thing to do. We're talking in the early 1930s. She wasn't a woman of means. Writing was how she earned her income. And so for her to have that integrity and to maintain the originality, I think that means something. And I'm very appreciative of her because reading the book, it's not the easiest thing at all. If anyone who's ever read slave narratives and you're reading, if the writer is capturing it as the subject spoke, you really have to take some time to read it and understand what you're saying. But as you read, you get to, like with anyone, if you speak to someone who has a very heavy accent, the more you listen to them, you get to become accustomed to and familiar with their dialect, and it just becomes easier. And so she maintained the integrity of that. And as I said, she wasn't a woman of means, and she had sponsors for much of what she did, or you get an advance and then you get paid after the fact. So I really think that was honorable. And so in Zora Neale Hurston's life, she didn't just rebel against what would have been favorable in her writing in terms of the dialect of the people that she wrote about, but she really found herself at odds with many who were prominent during the Harlem Renaissance or the movement of Black people for integration and civil rights. Notably, I'll mention W.E.B. Du Bois and Richard Wright, the author of Native Son. Zora Neale Hurston wrote about the lived experiences of Black people. She did not write about a certain genre or a certain singularity in the Black experience. She wrote about joy. She wrote about love. She wrote about ambition. She wrote about motivations. She wrote in a way that celebrates the characters that she um, created in her novels. And so contrast that at a time where many Black people were writing about the pain and the injustice that Black people were experiencing through racial inequities. And so she was criticized for not following suit. And she did not think that it was necessary to just focus on racial injustice when writing about Black life and Black characters. She did not think that the suffering aspect of Black life needed to be the primary focus or the primary voice or the primary experience that Black writers should write about and that Black readers or other readers should read about. She didn't want her art and her writing to be a tool to fight racial injustice. And I think we can understand instances in which we want, or some people want, a writer, a speaker, a musician to take on a mission. And that just wasn't her mission. And anyone who's produced any kind of art or something creative, you choose your lane, and instead of having your lane chosen for you. And that's how you maintain the authenticity of your voice. And that's what she did. And that's what she did for readers. And unfortunately, this had a very harmful effect on her. She was blacklisted to a great extent. Um, she could not get published. Now, as I mentioned, she's well known for the book that she wrote, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And that book came to be a standard book in African American literature, in Black literature. But unfortunately, not capitulating cost her a great deal. And anyone who studied her history, that, she had to go back to working as a maid. She had some very difficult times in her life. And ultimately, when she passed away in 1960, she passed away really poor, broke. And to think that she's so celebrated now, as it is with many artists, right? We have a greater appreciation for them after they've they've left us. But I'm so grateful that Alice Walker and others kind of resurrected her voice. But just going back to her not capitulating, I mean, even with the ruling of the Brown v. Board of Education, it was not her experience or a preference of desegregation or of integration. Where Zora Neale Hurston grew up in Florida, it was a Black town. And Black people occupied, just like wherever we live right now, those positions in leadership and authority. And she did not have that experience as a child to have a quote Black identity because everybody was Black. And so nobody was different. I mean, except for hues and shades. And seeing white people pass through her town. But race was not something that defined her as a child. That wasn't something that she experienced until she had to unfortunately leave home after the loss of her mother, her father remarrying, and her stepmother wanting her father to kind of get rid of her, and she had to go live elsewhere. But where she grew up and how she grew up, Black people were successful. Black people thrived. So you fast forward years later, she's not one of those Black people that experienced the quote shame and pain of being Black. She's even quoted as saying, like she couldn't believe that somebody wouldn't want to be around her, in terms of segregation and being separate. Like, why would somebody not want to be around me? She thought so much of herself, had such value of herself and other Black people. She did not believe that Black people needed to find worthiness or value because of their proximity to Caucasian people. That just wasn't something that she advocated for. And that was a very serious deviation during that time. And so, as I mentioned, because of that, she was unfortunately blacklisted. She couldn't get work. Publishers would not take her work. And so a lot of what we find with her, like Barakun, was published after her passing, although she's had, many, many great books that were written and published during her time. But because of the unfortunate experience that she had, even after her death, where she had, so many writings, a lot of the material was just burnt up and discarded, although close friends were able to acquire some things. But unfortunately, a great deal of her work was lost. But there's something that I want to share from something that she wrote, an essay titled How It Feels to Be Colored by Me. And this was written in 1928. This is around the time where she was getting a lot of criticism for not, writing in the same style or with the same subject matter as many famous and esteemed Black writers at the time. Again, she did not identify being Black with pain. And so this is what she wrote. But I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all. I do not belong to the sobbing school of Negrohood who hold that nature somehow has given them a low down dirty deal and whose feelings are all but about it. Even in the helter-skelter skirmish that is my life, I have seen that the world is to the strong, regardless of a little pigmentation, more or less. No, I do not weep at the world. I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife. I really think that speaks pretty solidly in summarizing her perspective on things, and I think it's a valued perspective. I too do not think that Black people need to find their value or be defined by their proximity to Caucasian people. We are people who are born with the sun. We are people who do not have a start date, a birth date, if you will. There has not been a date defined that starts the beginning of Black people. And so I can certainly relate to Zora Neale Hurston's perspective on the beauty and the wonder and the blessing to be Black. Black is not something that we should associate with shame and pain. Black is something that we should celebrate all the time. And so I can certainly relate to that. And it was really wonderful to kind of do a dive into the life, the perspective of Zora Neale Hurston. Again, I had just read that book and was really appreciative that she was someone who captured that history. And so, in consideration of featuring her as a woman for Women's History Month, I said, let me learn a little bit more about her. And I'm really glad that I did. I hope that you've enjoyed what I've shared with you of Zora Neale Hurston. I want to thank you for joining me in this episode 267 of the podcast. I really have been enjoying this time during Women's History Month to feature women, Henrietta Lacks and Marilyn Mosby, and now Zora Neale Hurston. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And make sure you subscribe to the Nora Speaks YouTube channel so that you can be notified. You can be up to date. And I do want to increase the subscriber on the show. Make sure you like it, you share it. You can leave comments. Let me know what you think about the show. If there's someone that you would like featured during this Women's History Month, you can let me know that as well. I am so appreciative of your time. So much is competing for our time. And so the moments that you give to Nora Speaks, I do appreciate it, and I appreciate you. Thank you for listening and for watching this episode of the podcast. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property. And to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. And what I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Nora Speaks. Look out for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, you can visit my website, noraspeaks.com. Or if you have a listener question, you can email me at nora@noraspeaks.com. Follow Nora Speaks on X, Instagram, and Facebook at Nora Speaks, or you can subscribe to the Nora Speaks YouTube channel. I will be sure to include links in the show notes. If Nora Speaks has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.